The rotor blades were spinning, the evacuation list was final, and Captain Ryan Torres had his orders. No civilians, no exceptions. But when she rolled up her pant leg and that small black mark caught the morning light, everything changed. The scanner didn't just beep, it screamed Priority Alpha. And suddenly, every soldier on that tarmac snapped to attention like their lives depended on it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana morning arrived, with the kind of cold that cut through clothing and settled in your bones. Fort Harrison stretched across the valley floor like a small city, its concrete buildings and training facilities disappearing into patches of mountain fog that rolled down from the peaks. The air smelled of pine needles and jet fuel, a combination that had become as familiar as coffee to the soldiers who called this place home. Sarah Mitchell pulled her worn Ford pickup into the visitor parking area, the engine ticking as it cooled in the crisp air. At 42, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it truly mattered. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, scuffed hiking boots that had seen countless trails, and a brown leather jacket that looked like it had stories to tell. The jacket hung loose on her frame, comfortable and lived in, the kind of clothing that spoke of practicality over fashion. In her jacket pocket, a worn manila envelope marked with a single word in faded ink, Blackwood. Her fingers traced its edges as she walked toward the main gate, feeling the weight of papers inside that most people would never see, never understand, and hopefully never need. The security checkpoint stood ahead, manned by young soldiers who processed hundreds of visitors each week with the practiced boredom of routine duty. The base was unusually active for a Tuesday morning. Humvees moved with purpose between buildings, and personnel walked with the quick, determined pace that suggested something important was happening. Above the general activity, the steady thrum of helicopter rotors added an urgent undertone to the mountain air. Black aircraft sat on the distant landing pads like sleeping predators, their crews performing pre-flight checks with military precision. Sarah approached the security checkpoint where Corporal Mike Williams sat behind bulletproof glass, checking identification cards with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of visitors. Beside him, a computer terminal displayed the morning's visitor list, a neat column of names and clearance levels that determined who could enter and how far they could go. She slid her driver's license through the slot, along with a letter bearing the official letterhead of the Department of Defense. Williams glanced at the license, then at the letter, his expression shifting from routine boredom to mild confusion. He looked up at Sarah through the glass, comparing her face to the photo, then back at the letter. The letter was brief, officially worded, and signed by someone whose title was long enough to suggest real authority. It requested Sarah's immediate access to the secure communications facility for consultation on Project Blackwood. Williams had processed thousands of these routine consultant visits, but something about this one felt different. The paper was too crisp, the signature too precise, and the urgency implied by the language seemed to contradict the casual appearance of the woman standing before him. He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Sergeant Morrison? Yeah, I've got a civilian here with a consultation request for the communications center. Project Blackwood." A pause as he listened. "Right. I'll send her over to LZ7 for transport." Williams handed back the identification and pointed toward a path that led between two large buildings. "Follow that walkway to the helicopter pad. They're expecting you." His tone suggested this was routine, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to place something that felt familiar but remained just out of reach. Sarah tucked the papers back into her jacket and walked toward the landing zone. The path wound between administrative buildings and training facilities, past groups of soldiers conducting morning exercises and maintenance crews servicing vehicles. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder with each step, accompanied by the sharp voices of crew chiefs coordinating the morning's flight operations. Landing Zone 7 sat on a wide concrete pad surrounded by safety barriers and warning signs. 3 black helicopters occupied the space, their rotors slowly turning as crews completed final preparations. The aircraft were military utility helicopters, designed for transport and reconnaissance, their dark paint schemes suggesting they were equipped for operations that didn't appear on public schedules. Near the center helicopter, a small group of personnel clustered around a clipboard-wielding figure, who was clearly in charge of the morning's activities. Lieutenant Amy Chen stood with the rigid posture of someone who took responsibility seriously, her uniform immaculate, despite the early hour and the dust being kicked up by the rotor wash. She checked items off her list with quick, efficient movements, ensuring that every detail of the evacuation protocol was followed precisely. Captain Ryan Torres emerged from the cockpit of the lead helicopter, removing his helmet and running a hand through his short brown hair. At 28, he carried himself with the confidence of a pilot who had logged hundreds of hours in challenging conditions, but his face showed the stress of an operation that was clearly not routine. He approached Chen with quick steps, speaking in low, urgent tones that were barely audible over the noise of the aircraft. Sergeant Jake Morrison climbed down from the co-pilot's seat, his movements showing the careful attention to detail of someone who knew that small mistakes in aviation could have large consequences. He was younger than Torres, maybe 25, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested this was his first major operation outside of training exercises. He checked and rechecked equipment with the thoroughness of someone who wasn't taking any chances. Sarah approached the group, her footsteps steady on the concrete despite the chaos of activity around her. Chen looked up from her clipboard as she drew near, her expression shifting from focused concentration to mild annoyance at the interruption. The morning's schedule was tight. The operation was complex, and the last thing she needed was another variable to manage. Chen's voice was crisp and professional, designed to be heard over the noise of the helicopters. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. All civilian personnel need to remain behind the safety barriers until after flight operations are complete." Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out the manila envelope, extending it toward Chen. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I believe I'm on your manifest for transport to Site Blackwood." Chen took the envelope and opened it, scanning the contents with quick, professional efficiency. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion as she read the official letterhead and the authorization codes. She looked up at Sarah, then back at the papers, clearly trying to reconcile the official nature of the documents with the casual appearance of the woman who had presented them. Torres stepped closer, glancing over Chen's shoulder at the papers. His expression mirrored her confusion as he read the authorization. "Site Blackwood?" he said, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. "Ma'am, I don't have any civilians on my manifest for Blackwood. That's a restricted site. Military personnel only." Morrison approached the group, drawn by the discussion that was clearly deviating from the planned schedule. He looked at Sarah with the kind of casual assessment that young soldiers often gave to civilians, his expression suggesting he found her presence on the landing pad both puzzling and mildly amusing. Chen flipped through the pages in the envelope, checking signatures and authorization codes against her own paperwork. "These documents look legitimate, but they're not on my authorized passenger list. I can't transport unauthorized personnel to a classified facility, regardless of what papers they might have." Sarah's voice remained calm despite the growing tension in the group. "Lieutenant, I suggest you verify those authorization codes with your command structure. Project Blackwood has time-sensitive requirements that don't accommodate delays." Torres stepped forward, his pilot's training making him naturally cautious about anything that deviated from established procedures. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've got specific orders about who gets transported to Blackwood today. Civilian consultants aren't part of the mission profile. The conversation was drawing attention from other personnel on the landing pad." Crew chiefs paused in their pre-flight checks to glance toward the group, and soldiers waiting for transport began to take notice of the discussion that was clearly becoming more heated. The morning's routine was being disrupted by a problem that no one had anticipated or prepared for. Chen closed the envelope and handed it back to Sarah. I'm sorry, but without proper clearance from base command, I can't authorize your transport. You'll need to return to the administrative building and get this sorted out through proper channels. Morrison nodded in agreement, his expression suggesting that he found the entire situation somewhat entertaining. Yeah, maybe come back when you've got the right paperwork. This isn't exactly a taxi service. Sarah looked at the three military personnel, her expression remaining calm despite their clear dismissal. The morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing more of the mountain landscape that surrounded the base, but the tension in the air seemed to thicken rather than dissipate. She understood their position, respected their adherence to protocol, but also knew that the situation required a different approach. She glanced toward the helicopter, then back at the group. How long before you need to depart for Blackwood? Torres checked his watch. Wheels up in 15 minutes. We've got a tight schedule, and weather conditions are going to deteriorate later this morning. Sarah nodded, as if confirming something to herself. She reached down and rolled up the left leg of her jeans, revealing a small black tattoo on her ankle. The design was simple at first glance, geometric patterns that might have been decorative, but as the morning light hit it, additional details became visible. Chen, Torres, and Morrison looked down at the tattoo with mild curiosity, unsure why she was showing them what appeared to be a simple ankle decoration. Chen's voice carried a note of impatience. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're trying to show us, but we really need to get back to our departure preparations. Sarah straightened up and looked directly at Torres. Captain, your helicopter is equipped with a security scanner for personnel verification, correct? Torres nodded, still confused about the direction of the conversation. Standard equipment for classified transport missions. But civilian personnel don't have clearance codes that would register on military systems. Sarah walked toward the helicopter, her movement deliberate and confident. I'd like to request a security scan. Morrison laughed, the sound carrying over the noise of the rotors. Ma'am, that scanner is for military personnel with active clearances. It's not going to recognize a civilian consultant, no matter what kind of paperwork you might have. Torres followed her toward the aircraft, his expression showing a mixture of professional courtesy and growing impatience. The scanner is designed for specific clearance levels. If you're not in the military database, it's just going to give us an error message. Sarah stopped beside the helicopter's side door, where a small black scanner was mounted next to the entry point. The device looked like standard military equipment, designed for quick verification of personnel boarding classified transport missions. She looked at Torres with an expression that seemed to carry more weight than her casual appearance suggested. Chen approached the group, clipboard still in hand, clearly ready to end the conversation and get back to the business of departure preparation. Captain Torres, we really need to stick to the schedule. The morning window for Blackwood is limited, and we can't afford delays. Sarah placed her ankle against the scanner, positioning the tattoo directly under the red laser that emerged from the device. The scanner hummed softly as it read the markings, the sound barely audible over the helicopter noise. For a moment, nothing happened, and Morrison started to make another comment about the futility of the exercise. Then the scanner beeped. Not the simple acknowledgement tone that indicated routine clearance verification, but preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A rapid series of beeps that suggested something unexpected was happening. The small display screen above the scanner flickered, showing lines of text that scrolled too quickly for the watching personnel to read clearly. Torres stepped closer to the scanner, his expression shifting from impatience to confusion as he watched the display. The text continued scrolling, showing clearance levels and authorization codes that he had never seen before. Morrison and Chen moved closer as well, drawn by the unexpected activity from a device that should have simply rejected a civilian's attempt at verification. The scanner's beeping changed to a steady tone, and the display stabilized, showing a single line of text in bright green letters. Priority Alpha clearance confirmed. Codename: Nightingale. The effect on the 3 military personnel was immediate and dramatic. Torres straightened to attention so quickly that it looked like someone had pulled him upright with a string. Chen's clipboard fell from her suddenly nerveless fingers, scattering papers across the concrete pad. Morrison's casual demeanor vanished entirely, replaced by the rigid posture of a soldier who had just realized he was in the presence of someone far above his pay grade. Torres's voice, when he finally managed to speak, was tight with shock and growing concern. "Ma'am, I need to contact Base Command immediately." Chen bent to retrieve her scattered papers, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to reorganize her carefully maintained manifest. Priority Alpha clearance. I've never seen that designation before. Morrison stood frozen, his face pale as he stared at the scanner display that continued to show the confirmed clearance level. Nightingale? What kind of codename is that? Sarah stepped back from the scanner, her expression remaining calm despite the dramatic change in the atmosphere around her. Captain Torres, I believe you'll find that Priority Alpha clearance supersedes your current mission parameters. Lieutenant Chen, you might want to update your passenger manifest. Torres pulled a radio from his belt, his movements quick and precise. Base Command, this is Raven-1. We have a Priority Alpha clearance verification at LZ-7. Requesting immediate confirmation and guidance. The radio crackled to life almost instantly, the voice on the other end carrying the kind of urgency that suggested the Priority Alpha designation had triggered alerts throughout the Base Command structure. RAVEN-1. Confirm Priority Alpha verification. What is the codename associated with the clearance? Torres glanced at Sarah, then back at the scanner display. Codename Nightingale. Base Command. A long pause followed, filled only by the sound of helicopter rotors and the distant activity of the morning's base operations. When the voice returned, it carried a different tone entirely, one that suggested significant people were now paying attention to the situation at Landing Zone 7. RAVEN-1. Stand by for priority communication. Do not acknowledge further radio traffic until authorized. Chen looked up from her scattered papers, her professional composure beginning to return, despite her obvious confusion about the morning's unexpected developments. Captain, what does Priority Alpha clearance actually mean? I've been processing transport manifests for 3 years, and I've never encountered that designation. Torres shook his head, clearly as confused as his subordinate. I've been flying classified missions for 5 years, and I've never seen anything above Priority Gamma clearance, Alpha level. That's supposed to be theoretical. Morrison had moved closer to the helicopter, staring at the scanner display as if hoping it might change or reveal that the entire incident was some kind of equipment malfunction. Maybe the scanner's broken? Maybe it's reading the tattoo as some kind of barcode? Sarah walked to where Chen was still organizing her papers, her movement calm and deliberate. Lieutenant, you might want to prepare space for 1 additional passenger. The flight to Blackwood is going to proceed as originally scheduled. Chen looked up at her, then at Torres, clearly uncertain about how to proceed with a situation that had moved far beyond her training and experience. Ma'am, I still don't understand exactly what's happening here. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was different, carrying the kind of authority that made soldiers automatically stand straighter. RAVEN-1. This is Colonel Rodriguez. Priority Alpha clearance is confirmed and recognized. You are authorized to transport Nightingale to Site Blackwood immediately. Consider this a direct order. Torres acknowledged the transmission, his voice tight with the stress of an operation that had suddenly become far more significant than he had anticipated. Roger. Base Command. Raven-1 will transport Nightingale to Blackwood as ordered. Chen stood up, her papers finally organized, but her expression still showing the confusion of someone trying to process events that didn't fit into her understanding of normal military operations. Captain, should I update the passenger manifest? Torres looked at Sarah, then at the scanner that still displayed her confirmed clearance level. Update the manifest. One additional passenger. Priority Alpha clearance. Codename Nightingale. Morrison approached Torres, speaking in low tones that were barely audible over the helicopter noise. "Captain, what exactly are we transporting to Blackwood? This doesn't feel like a routine consultation mission anymore." Torres glanced around the landing pad, noting that their conversation had drawn the attention of other personnel who were beginning to gather at a respectful distance, clearly aware that something unusual was happening, but uncertain about the appropriate response. "Sergeant, our orders are clear. We transport Nightingale to Blackwood. No questions asked." Sarah climbed into the helicopter, taking a seat near the front of the passenger compartment. Her movement was smooth and practiced, suggesting familiarity with military aircraft that contradicted her civilian appearance. She fastened her seatbelt with quick, efficient motions and settled back into the seat as if preparing for a routine flight. Chen approached the aircraft, manifest in hand, her professional demeanor returning despite the morning's unexpected developments. "Ma'am, estimated flight time to Blackwood is 45 minutes. Weather conditions are currently acceptable, but visibility may decrease due to mountain fog." Torres completed his pre-flight checks with extra attention to detail, clearly aware that the morning's mission had acquired a level of importance that he hadn't anticipated. Morrison took his position in the co-pilot's seat, running through his own checklist, with the thoroughness of someone who understood that small mistakes could have large consequences. The other helicopters on the landing pad began their departure preparations, their crews moving with the coordinated efficiency of personnel who had conducted similar operations many times before. But there was an additional tension in the air now, a sense that the morning's routine had been disrupted by something that no one fully understood. As the helicopter's rotors spun up to departure speed, Sarah looked out the window at the mountain landscape that surrounded Fort Harrison. The peaks stretched away into the distance, their tops still shrouded in fog that gave them an ethereal, mysterious quality. Somewhere in those mountains lay Site Blackwood, a facility that existed on few official maps and in fewer official documents. Torres's voice came through the intercom as the helicopter lifted off from the landing pad. "Nightingale, we'll be at Blackwood in approximately 45 minutes. If you need anything during the flight, just let us know." Sarah nodded, her expression calm despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her aboard the aircraft. She reached into her jacket pocket and touched the manila envelope, feeling the weight of documents that would soon reveal why a priority Alpha clearance had been necessary, and why Site Blackwood required her immediate attention. Below them, Fort Harrison grew smaller as the helicopter gained altitude, the base's buildings and facilities becoming geometric patterns against the valley floor. Ahead lay the mountains, the morning fog, and whatever waited at a facility that officially didn't exist but required the highest possible clearance to access. The tattoo on Sarah's ankle was hidden again beneath her jeans, but its significance had already changed the trajectory of the morning's mission. 3 military personnel who had begun their day expecting a routine transport operation now found themselves carrying a passenger whose presence suggested that nothing about the day would be routine at all. The helicopter cut through the mountain air with mechanical precision, its rotors slicing through wisps of fog that clung to the peaks like ghostly fingers. Sarah Mitchell sat in the passenger compartment, her eyes focused on the landscape below, while her mind processed the chain of events that had brought her back into a world she had tried to leave behind. The manila envelope in her jacket pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, its contents representing years of buried secrets that were about to surface. Captain Torres maintained a steady altitude as they navigated through the mountain passes, his hands moving over the controls with the practiced ease of someone who had flown these routes many times before. But his eyes kept drifting to the rearview mirror, stealing glances at the woman who had transformed a routine transport mission into something far more complex. The priority Alpha clearance still displayed on his onboard computer, a constant reminder that nothing about this flight was routine. In the co-pilot's seat, Sergeant Morrison struggled to maintain his professional composure while grappling with questions that had no easy answers. He had been flying classified missions for 2 years, transporting personnel and equipment to facilities that didn't appear on civilian maps, but he had never encountered a clearance level that seemed to bypass every protocol he knew. The scanner's confirmation of Nightingale's identity had shaken his understanding of how military operations were supposed to work. The radio crackled to life with a transmission from Fort Harrison's control tower, the voice carrying the kind of urgent professionalism that suggested significant attention was being paid to their flight. RAVEN-1, this is Base Command. Be advised that your flight path to Blackwood is being monitored by multiple agencies. Maintain current heading and altitude. Do not deviate from assigned route. Torres acknowledged the transmission, but his expression showed growing concern about the level of attention their helicopter was receiving. Base Command, requesting clarification on monitoring agencies. Are there any special protocols we should be aware of? A pause followed, filled with the kind of silence that suggested discussions were taking place on frequencies that Raven 1 couldn't hear. When the response came, it carried a different tone entirely. RAVEN-1. All protocols are being handled at command level. Your only responsibility is safe delivery of Nightingale to Blackwood. Acknowledge. Torres exchanged glances with Morrison, both men recognizing the kind of language that meant they were no longer operating under normal circumstances. Acknowledged, Base Command. Raven 1 proceeding to Blackwood as ordered. Sarah leaned forward in her seat, her voice cutting through the noise of the helicopter's engines. Captain, have you been to Site Blackwood before? Torres nodded, his attention divided between flying the aircraft and trying to understand the woman who had so dramatically altered his morning. Multiple times, ma'am. It's a research facility, officially classified as a geological survey station. Most of the personnel are civilian scientists, conducting mineral surveys and environmental studies. Morrison turned in his seat to look at Sarah, his young face showing the kind of curiosity that hadn't yet been tempered by years of military discretion. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of consultation work requires priority alpha clearance? I mean, geological surveys don't usually involve that level of classification. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her eyes carried a weight that suggested she was accustomed to questions that couldn't be answered directly. Sergeant, there are many types of research that require specialized oversight. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that need to be carefully managed. The helicopter began its descent toward a valley that appeared uninhabited from the air. Nothing visible except dense forest and rocky outcroppings that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. But as they dropped lower, details became visible that revealed the presence of human activity. Solar panels gleamed among the trees, their surfaces angled to catch maximum sunlight. Antenna arrays pointed toward the sky, their metallic structures incongruous against the natural landscape. Torres's voice came through the intercom, with the practiced calm of a pilot approaching a familiar destination. Nightingale, we're beginning our approach to Blackwood. The landing zone is small, surrounded by trees, so the descent might be a bit bumpy. Through the helicopter's windows, Site Blackwood gradually revealed itself as something far more substantial than the simple research station Torres had described. The facility sprawled across the valley floor, its buildings connected by covered walkways that suggested the complex was designed for year-round operation in harsh weather conditions. Satellite dishes of various sizes dotted the landscape, their orientations indicating communication capabilities that seemed excessive for a geological survey station. Most striking was the facility's integration with the natural environment. Buildings were positioned to take advantage of natural screening provided by rock formations and dense tree cover. From certain angles, the entire complex would be nearly invisible to aerial observation, a level of concealment that suggested purposes beyond simple scientific research. Morrison whistled softly as he took in the scope of the facility below them. That's a lot bigger than I expected. How many people work down there? Torres checked his instruments as he guided the helicopter toward a landing pad that appeared to be the facility's only visible connection to the outside world. Official manifest says 47 personnel, but I've never seen more than a dozen people during any of my visits. The place always feels half empty. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt as the helicopter touched down, her movements showing the kind of automatic preparation that suggested extensive experience with military aircraft. She reached into her jacket and withdrew the manila envelope, checking its contents one final time before tucking it securely away. Whatever was inside those documents would soon become the focus of intense attention from people who had been waiting for her arrival. The landing pad was smaller than the one at Fort Harrison, surrounded by forest that seemed to press in from all sides. A single figure waited near the edge of the pad, a woman in civilian clothes whose posture and bearing suggested military background despite her casual appearance. Dr. Jennifer Adams had been the facility director at Blackwood for 3 years, overseeing research projects that rarely appeared in official reports and never appeared in public documents. As the helicopter's rotors spun down, Dr. Adams approached the aircraft with quick, purposeful strides. She was in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back and a practical ponytail and clothing that suggested she spent more time in laboratories than in administrative offices. Her expression showed the kind of focused intensity that came from managing projects where small mistakes could have large consequences. Torres opened the passenger door and stepped out, his pilot's training making him automatically concerned about the safety of everyone in his charge. "Dr. Adams, we've delivered Nightingale as requested. Is there anything else you need from us?" Dr. Adams shook her head, her attention already focused on Sarah, who was climbing out of the helicopter with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the morning. "Captain Torres, you can return to Fort Harrison immediately. We'll handle transportation arrangements for Nightingale when her consultation is complete." Morrison remained in the co-pilot's seat, his curiosity about the mysterious passenger warring, with his understanding that some questions were better left unasked. He watched through the window as Sarah approached Dr. Adams, noting the way the two women seemed to recognize each other despite their apparent first meeting. Sarah extended her hand to Dr. Adams, her greeting carrying the kind of professional warmth that suggested shared experience in challenging circumstances. "Dr. Adams, thank you for accommodating the short notice. I understand the situation has become quite urgent." Dr. Adams nodded, her expression showing the strain of someone who had been dealing with escalating problems for weeks. "More urgent than we anticipated when we first reached out. The anomalies have been increasing in frequency and intensity. We've had to evacuate non-essential personnel twice in the past month." Torres began his post-flight checks, but his attention remained focused on the conversation between Sarah and Dr. Adams. The mention of anomalies and evacuation suggested that Site Blackwood was dealing with problems that went far beyond routine geological research. His pilot's instincts were telling him that there was more to this facility than anyone had admitted. "Doctor." Adams gestured toward the facility's main building, a structure that seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. "We should get you briefed immediately. The team has been working around the clock to understand what we're dealing with, but we need someone with your specific expertise to make sense of the data." Sarah fell into step beside Dr. Adams as they walked toward the facility, her movements showing the kind of automatic situational awareness that suggested extensive training in hostile environments. She scanned the tree line, noted the positions of the antenna arrays, and observed the placement of what appeared to be security cameras disguised as environmental monitoring equipment. Behind them, Torres completed his checks and prepared for departure, but his radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from Fort Harrison. "RAVEN-1, this is Base Command. You are directed to remain on station at Blackwood until further notice. Repeat, do not return to base until authorized." Torres acknowledged the transmission, his confusion evident in his voice. "Base Command, understood. Raven 1 will remain at Blackwood. Can you provide an estimated time for departure clearance?" The response carried the kind of non-committal language that suggested decisions were being made at levels far above his pay grade. "RAVEN-1. Departure clearance will be provided when consultation is complete. Monitor this frequency for updates." Morrison looked at Torres with raised eyebrows, both men recognizing that their routine transport mission had evolved into something that required them to remain at a classified facility of unknown purpose. "Captain, This is getting stranger by the minute. What kind of consultation keeps a helicopter crew on standby? Torres shut down the aircraft's engines, accepting that they would be remaining at Blackwood for an indefinite period, the kind that involves priority alpha clearance, Sergeant. I have a feeling we're about to learn things that aren't covered in our training manuals. Inside the facility, Sarah followed Dr. Adams through corridors that seemed to extend much further into the mountain than the external appearance of the building suggested. The walls were lined with equipment that looked more advanced than anything she had seen in civilian research facilities, and the air carried the distinctive smell of ozone that suggested high-powered electronic systems operating at full capacity. Dr. Adams led her to a conference room where several people waited around a table covered with printouts, photographs, and electronic devices. The team included Dr. Michael Chen, a physicist whose nervous energy suggested he had been surviving on coffee and determination for days, Dr. Sarah Williams, a geologist whose dirt-stained clothing indicated recent fieldwork, and Agent Robert Clark, whose federal identification and pressed suit marked him as someone whose presence at Blackwood represented interests beyond scientific research. Dr. Adams took her position at the head of the table, her expression showing the kind of controlled tension that came from briefing people on situations that defied easy explanation. Sarah, thank you for coming on such short notice. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels, and it represents a problem that we frankly don't understand. She activated a large display screen that showed a topographical map of the area surrounding Site Blackwood. Overlaid on the map were numerous red dots, each marked with dates and times that suggested some kind of ongoing monitoring operation. The dots formed patterns that seemed to follow the valley's natural contours, but their distribution suggested something more complex than random geological activity. Dr. Chen leaned forward, his voice carrying the kind of intensity that came from sleepless nights spent trying to solve unsolvable problems. 3 months ago, we started detecting seismic anomalies in this region. At first, we thought they were related to natural geological processes, maybe small earthquakes or underground water movement, but the patterns don't match anything in our databases. Sarah studied the display, her expression showing the kind of focused attention that suggested she was processing information that others might find overwhelming. What kind of frequencies are you detecting? Are they consistent with any known geological phenomena? Dr. Williams reached for a stack of printouts, her movements quick and efficient despite obvious fatigue. That's just it, they're not consistent with anything we know. The frequencies are too regular, too precise. They're occurring at intervals that suggest some kind of artificial source, but we can't identify what might be causing them. Agent Clark spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the kind of measured authority that suggested he was accustomed to dealing with situations that required careful handling. Sarah, we've been monitoring this situation for weeks, and it's escalating beyond our ability to contain or understand. We need someone with your background to help us determine whether we're dealing with a natural phenomenon or something else entirely. Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who had been struggling with a problem that seemed to have no solution. How long have these anomalies been occurring? And what makes you think they're connected to anything in my area of expertise? Dr. Adams activated another display, this one showing a series of photographs that had been taken in the area surrounding the facility. The images showed formations in the rock and soil that looked like they had been created by intense heat or pressure, but the patterns were too regular and too precise to be natural. Some of the formations seemed to spiral inward toward central points, while others radiated outward in perfect geometric patterns. Dr. Chen pointed to one of the photographs, his finger tracing the outline of a formation that looked like it had been carved by an intelligent hand. These formations started appearing about 6 weeks ago. They're showing up in locations that correspond to our seismic readings, but they're not being created by any geological process we understand. Sarah studied the photographs with growing interest, her expression showing the kind of recognition that suggested she was seeing patterns that others might miss. Have you conducted any excavation work at these sites? Are there any artifacts or materials that might provide clues about what's creating these formations? Dr. Williams nodded, reaching for another stack of photographs. We've excavated 3 sites so far, And what we've found doesn't make sense according to any conventional understanding of geology or archaeology. The formations go deeper than our equipment can reach, and they seem to be constructed from materials that we can't identify. She spread several photographs across the table, each showing excavation sites that revealed structures buried beneath the forest floor. The buried structures appeared to be made of a dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they were arranged in patterns that suggested complex geometric relationships. Agent Clark leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of controlled frustration that came from dealing with problems that seemed to have no conventional solutions. Sarah, we've consulted with experts from multiple disciplines, and no one can explain what we're seeing. The formations are too advanced for any known ancient civilization, but they're too old to be the result of modern technology. Sarah picked up one of the photographs, holding it closer to the light as she studied the details of the excavated structure. The material appeared to be seamless, without joints or construction marks that would indicate how it had been assembled. The surface was covered with markings that looked like they might be symbols or writing, but the patterns were unlike anything in known archaeological databases. Dr. Adams activated a third display, this one showing a timeline of events that had occurred at Site Blackwood over the past several months. The timeline showed the progression of anomalies, from initial seismic readings through the appearance of surface formations to the discovery of buried structures. Each event was marked with precise dates and times, creating a pattern that suggested accelerating activity. Dr. Chen stood and walked to the display, pointing to specific events on the timeline. The activity has been increasing exponentially. What started as minor seismic readings has evolved into something that's affecting the entire region. We've had to evacuate personnel twice because the intensity of the anomalies made it unsafe to remain at the facility. Sarah studied the timeline, her expression showing the kind of analytical thinking that suggested she was processing information in ways that others might not consider. Have you detected any correlation between the anomalies and external factors, solar activity, magnetic field variations, or other environmental changes? Dr. Williams shook her head, her expression showing the frustration of someone who had explored every conventional explanation without finding answers. We've checked everything we can think of. The anomalies don't correlate with any known natural cycles or external influences. They seem to be following their own internal logic. Agent Clark reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed folder, placing it on the table with the kind of careful attention that suggested its contents were highly classified. Sarah, there's one more thing we need to show you. This information is classified at levels that require special handling, but your clearance allows access. He opened the folder, revealing photographs that had been taken by satellite surveillance over the past several weeks. The images showed the area around Site Blackwood from high altitude, but they also revealed features that weren't visible from ground level. The forest canopy appeared to be arranged in patterns that suggested artificial manipulation, and there were clearings that formed geometric shapes when viewed from above. Sarah studied the satellite photographs, her expression showing the kind of recognition that suggested she was seeing patterns that confirmed her suspicions about the nature of the anomalies. How long have these patterns been visible from satellite surveillance? Dr. Adams consulted her notes, her expression showing the kind of precise attention to detail that suggested she had been tracking every aspect of the situation. The first satellite images showing these patterns were taken about 8 weeks ago. The formations have been becoming more pronounced over time, as if something is actively shaping the landscape. Dr. Chen returned to his seat, his expression showing the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of intensive work on problems that seemed to have no solutions. Sarah, we've reached the limits of what we can understand using conventional scientific methods. We need someone with your background to help us determine whether we're dealing with something that requires a completely different approach. Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who had been struggling with a mystery that seemed to defy conventional explanation. The photographs, the timeline, and the satellite images all pointed to something that was operating according to principles that weren't covered in standard scientific textbooks, but her expression showed the kind of calm confidence that suggested she might have insights that others lacked. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew the manila envelope, placing it on the table with the kind of careful attention that suggested its contents were directly relevant to the situation at hand. "Dr. Adams, I think it's time I showed you why my consultation was specifically requested for this situation." The room fell silent as Sarah opened the envelope, revealing documents that bore classifications and markings that were unfamiliar to most of the people around the table. The papers appeared to be technical specifications and analytical reports, but they dealt with subjects that seemed to bridge the gap between conventional science and something far more exotic. Agent Clark leaned forward, his expression showing the kind of intense interest that suggested he might be the only person in the room who understood the significance of what Sarah was revealing. "Are those related to the Phoenix Protocol?" Sarah nodded, her expression showing the kind of serious attention that suggested they were about to discuss subjects that were normally handled at the highest levels of government. "The Phoenix Protocol was developed to deal with situations exactly like what you're experiencing at Blackwood. The anomalies you've been detecting aren't natural phenomena, and they're not the result of any known technology." Dr. Adams stared at the documents, her expression showing the kind of shock that came from realizing that a situation she thought was unique had actually been anticipated by people who understood aspects of reality that weren't covered in conventional scientific training. "Sarah, are you saying that these anomalies are connected to classified research programs?" Sarah spread several of the documents across the table, revealing technical diagrams and analytical data that seemed to provide explanations for the mysterious phenomena that had been plaguing Site Blackwood. "The anomalies are indicators of dimensional instability. What you're experiencing here is the result of interactions between our reality and something that exists in parallel dimensions." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything that the assembled scientists and officials thought they understood about the nature of reality. Dr. Chen stared at the documents, his expression showing the kind of intellectual shock that came from encountering concepts that required fundamental reassessment of basic assumptions about how the universe worked. Dr. Williams reached for one of the documents, her hands trembling slightly, as she read technical specifications that dealt with subjects she had never encountered in her geological training. "Dimensional instability? Are you saying that the formations we've been finding are the result of interactions with parallel realities?" Sarah nodded, her expression showing the kind of calm professionalism that suggested she had dealt with similar situations before. "The formations are focal points where dimensional barriers have become permeable. The seismic anomalies are the result of energy transfers between dimensions, and the patterns you're seeing are the physical manifestations of those transfers." Agent Clark leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of controlled tension that came from dealing with classified information that had implications far beyond the immediate situation. "Sarah, if the dimensional barriers are becoming permeable, what does that mean for the stability of this region?" Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who were beginning to understand that the situation at Site Blackwood was far more complex and potentially dangerous than they had initially realized. "It means that Site Blackwood is located at the center of a dimensional intersection that's becoming increasingly unstable. If the process continues, it could affect the entire region." The implications of her statement began to sink in, as the assembled team realized that their research facility was positioned at the center of a phenomenon that could have consequences extending far beyond the boundaries of their classified site. The mystery of the anomalies had been solved, but the solution had revealed a problem that was far more complex and potentially catastrophic than anyone had imagined. Dr. Adams stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest that surrounded their facility with new understanding of the forces that were at work beneath the seemingly peaceful landscape. "Sarah, what do we need to do to stabilize the dimensional barriers, and how much time do we have before the situation becomes critical?" Sarah gathered the documents and returned them to the envelope, her movements showing the kind of careful precision that suggested she was preparing for a complex operation that would require all of her expertise and experience. "Dr. Adams, stabilizing dimensional barriers requires equipment and procedures that aren't available at Site Blackwood. We need to contact the Phoenix Protocol team and request immediate support." The conference room fell silent as the implications of the situation became clear to everyone present. Site Blackwood, which had been established as a routine research facility, had become the center of a phenomenon that required intervention from classified programs that most of the team hadn't known existed. The morning's consultation had evolved into something that would require resources and expertise from the highest levels of government. Outside, Captain Torres and Sergeant Morrison waited beside their helicopter, unaware that their routine transport mission had delivered them to the center of a situation that would soon require their aircraft for purposes far beyond anything they had been trained to handle. The mountains surrounding Site Blackwood looked peaceful in the afternoon light, but beneath the surface, forces were at work that would soon transform the entire region into something that challenged the basic assumptions of reality itself. The secure communication console in the conference room chimed with an incoming priority transmission, its distinctive tone cutting through the heavy silence that had settled over the assembled team. Dr. Adams moved quickly to the terminal, entering her authorization codes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled classified communications many times before. The screen flickered to life, displaying the seal of the Department of Defense, followed by a series of security protocols that indicated the highest level of classification. A face appeared on the screen, weathered and serious, belonging to Colonel David Rodriguez, whose expression carried the weight of someone who had been briefed on situations that didn't appear in public reports. His uniform bore decorations that suggested extensive experience in operations that required discretion and specialized expertise. Behind him, the sterile environment of Fort Harrison's Secure Communications Center provided a backdrop that emphasized the gravity of the conversation about to take place. Colonel Rodriguez's voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the room instinctively straighten their posture. "Dr. Adams, I understand you've briefed Nightingale on the situation at Blackwood. What's her assessment of the dimensional instabilities?" Sarah stepped into view of the camera, her expression showing the kind of professional calm that suggested she was accustomed to briefing senior military officials on situations that challenged conventional understanding. "Colonel Rodriguez, the barriers between dimensions are deteriorating at an accelerating rate. The formations you've been documenting are physical manifestations of energy bleeding through from parallel realities." Agent Clark moved closer to the screen, his federal credentials giving him the authority to participate in conversations that might normally be above his clearance level. "Colonel, what resources are available through the Phoenix Protocol?" "Dr. Mitchell has indicated that stabilizing the dimensional barriers will require specialized equipment." Colonel Rodriguez consulted something off-screen, his expression showing the kind of concentrated attention that suggested he was coordinating multiple aspects of a complex operation. "Agent Clark, Phoenix Protocol assets are being mobilized as we speak. Major Lisa Thompson is en route to Blackwood with a specialist team and the equipment necessary for barrier stabilization procedures." Dr. Chen leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his exhaustion as he processed the implications of a military protocol designed to handle dimensional instabilities. "Colonel, how long has the Phoenix Protocol existed? Are dimensional anomalies a known phenomenon that's been classified for security reasons?" The pause that followed suggested that Colonel Rodriguez was carefully considering how much information could be shared with personnel who hadn't been previously briefed on the most classified aspects of reality. "Dr. Chen, the Phoenix Protocol was established after certain discoveries made it clear that conventional physics doesn't account for all the forces at work in our universe. Dimensional instabilities are rare, but they're not unprecedented." Sarah walked to the window that overlooked the forest surrounding Site Blackwood, her gaze focused on the tree line where several of the mysterious formations had been discovered. "Colonel, what's the estimated time frame for Major Thompson's arrival? The energy readings have been increasing steadily, and I'm concerned about the possibility of a cascade failure in the dimensional barriers." Colonel Rodriguez's expression grew more serious as he considered the implications of a cascade failure, a term that clearly carried significance for someone familiar with the Phoenix Protocol. "Nightingale, Major Thompson's team is approximately 2 hours out from Blackwood. Can the situation be stabilized until their arrival?" Dr. Williams spread several printouts across the table, each showing seismic readings that had been collected over the past several days. The data revealed patterns that seemed to be building towards some kind of climactic event, with energy levels increasing exponentially as the anomalies became more frequent and intense. The seismic activity has been following a clear progression. If the current trend continues, we could see a major event within the next 6 to 8 hours. Agent Clark studied the data, his expression showing the kind of controlled concern that came from understanding the potential consequences of dimensional instabilities in a populated region. "Colonel, what's the evacuation protocol if the situation becomes critical? Are there contingency plans for protecting civilian populations?" Colonel Rodriguez's response carried the weight of someone who had been involved in planning for scenarios that most people couldn't imagine. "Agent Clark, evacuation protocols are in place, but our primary objective is to stabilize the dimensional barriers before evacuation becomes necessary. Major Thompson's team has successfully contained similar situations in other locations." Dr. Adams returned to the communication console, her expression showing the strain of someone who had been managing an escalating crisis for weeks without fully understanding its nature. "Colonel, what can you tell us about the other locations where dimensional instabilities have occurred? Are there common factors that might help us understand why Blackwood has become a focal point?" The question seemed to touch on information that required careful handling, and Colonel Rodriguez paused before responding. "Dr. Adams, dimensional instabilities tend to occur at locations where the barriers between realities are naturally thin. These sites often coincide with areas of unusual geological activity or historical significance." Sarah turned back to the group, her expression showing the kind of recognition that suggested she was beginning to understand the broader context of the situation at Blackwood. "The formations we've been finding aren't random occurrences. They're appearing at specific locations that have significance in terms of dimensional stability." She moved to the table where the satellite photographs were spread out, pointing to patterns that became more obvious when viewed as part of a larger whole. These clearings and formations aren't being created by the dimensional instabilities. They're markers that indicate where the barriers have always been weakest. Dr. Chen stood and joined her at the table, his scientific training helping him process the implications of what she was suggesting. "Are you saying that Site Blackwood was built at a location that was already predisposed to dimensional instabilities? That the research facility was established here because of these properties rather than in spite of them?" Agent Clark's expression showed the kind of dawning understanding that came from realizing that a situation was far more complex than it had initially appeared. The geological survey mission was a cover story. Site Blackwood was established specifically to monitor dimensional stability in this region. Colonel Rodriguez's voice from the communication console confirmed what the assembled team was beginning to suspect. "Agent Clark, Site Blackwood has been monitoring dimensional stability for 3 years. The recent escalation in anomalies represents a significant departure from baseline conditions." Dr. Williams looked up from the seismic data, her expression showing the kind of shock that came from realizing that her work had been part of a much larger operation. "All of our geological surveys, all of the environmental monitoring we've been conducting, it's all been related to tracking dimensional stability?" Sarah nodded, her expression showing the kind of professional sympathy that suggested she understood the disorientation that came from discovering that routine work had been part of classified operations. "The geological surveys provided cover for more sensitive monitoring equipment. Your environmental data has been crucial for understanding how dimensional instabilities affect the physical world." Dr. Adams sank into her chair, the weight of 3 years of hidden purposes settling over her, as she processed the revelation that her leadership of Site Blackwood had been based on incomplete information. "How many of my team members know the real purpose of this facility? How many people have been working on dimensional monitoring without realizing it?" Colonel Rodriguez's response carried the kind of measured authority that suggested he was accustomed to managing the complex security requirements of operations that bridged multiple levels of classification. "Dr. Adams, all personnel at Blackwood have been cleared for their specific roles, but full knowledge of the Phoenix Protocol has been limited to those with direct operational responsibilities." The communication console chimed again, and a second face appeared on the screen beside Colonel Rodriguez. Major Lisa Thompson wore the uniform of someone whose career had involved assignments that didn't appear on public records, and her expression carried the focused intensity of someone preparing for a complex operation under time pressure. Major Thompson's voice was crisp and professional, designed to convey essential information efficiently. "Dr. Adams, my team is en route to Blackwood with barrier stabilization equipment. We need to establish a secure perimeter around the primary dimensional focal points before we can begin containment procedures." Sarah moved closer to the communication console, her expression showing the kind of recognition that suggested she and Major Thompson had worked together before. "Major Thompson, what's the status of the portable barrier generators? Are they configured for the specific resonance frequencies we're detecting at Blackwood?" Major Thompson consulted something off-screen, her movements quick and efficient, as she coordinated multiple aspects of a complex operation while maintaining communication with the site team. "Nightingale, the generators have been calibrated based on the data Dr. Adams's team has been collecting. We should be able to establish initial containment within 30 minutes of arrival." Dr. Chen leaned toward the screen, his scientific curiosity driving him to ask questions that might help him understand the technology being deployed to address the crisis. "Major Thompson, how do barrier generators work? Are they based on conventional physics or do they operate according to principles related to dimensional theory?" Major Thompson's expression showed the kind of patience that suggested she was accustomed to briefing scientists who were encountering dimensional stabilization technology for the first time. "Dr. Chen, the generators create interference patterns that strengthen the natural barriers between dimensions. The technology is based on principles that extend conventional physics into areas that haven't been publicly documented." Agent Clark studied the satellite photographs that were still spread across the table, his expression showing the kind of analytical thinking that suggested he was trying to understand the operational requirements of the stabilization mission. "Major Thompson, how large a perimeter do you need to establish around the dimensional focal points? Are there specific locations that require priority attention?" Major Thompson activated what appeared to be a digital map display, showing the area around Site Blackwood marked with various symbols and coordinates. "Agent Clark, we need to establish containment at 7 primary focal points distributed throughout the valley. The largest formation requires a perimeter of approximately 200 meters. Quote, Dr. Williams pointed to several of the excavation photographs, her geological training helping her understand the spatial relationships between the various formations that had been discovered. "Major Thompson, the formations we've excavated seem to be connected by underground structures. Will your containment procedures address the subsurface dimensional instabilities?" Major Thompson nodded, her expression showing the kind of professional confidence that suggested she had dealt with similar situations before. "Dr. Williams, the barrier generators create 3-dimensional containment fields that extend both above and below ground level. The underground structures will be isolated along with the surface formations." Sarah walked to the window again, her attention focused on the forest where the afternoon shadows were beginning to lengthen as the day progressed toward evening. "Major Thompson, what's the risk assessment if containment isn't established before the next major energy spike? Dr. Williams's data suggests we could see significant escalation within hours." Major Thompson's expression grew more serious as she considered the implications of a failed containment operation. "Nightingale, if we can't establish containment before the next major event, the dimensional barriers could suffer permanent damage. That would transform Blackwood from a monitoring site into a permanent dimensional intersection." The implications of permanent dimensional intersection hung in the air, as the assembled team processed what such a development would mean for the region, and potentially for much larger areas. Dr. Adams stood and walked to the map display, studying the locations where barrier generators would need to be positioned. Dr. Adams's voice carried the weight of someone who was beginning to understand the full scope of the crisis that had been developing at her facility. "Major Thompson, what happens to Site Blackwood if the containment operation is successful? Can normal operations resume, or will the facility need to be permanently reconfigured?" Major Thompson consulted with someone off-screen before responding, her expression showing the kind of careful consideration that suggested long-term planning was already underway. "Dr. Adams, Successful containment will stabilize the dimensional barriers, but Blackwood will require permanent monitoring and periodic maintenance of the containment systems. Agent Clark leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of thoughtful analysis that suggested he was considering the broader implications of the Phoenix Protocol and its role in managing dimensional instabilities. Major Thompson, how many other sites like Blackwood are currently being monitored? Is dimensional instability a widespread phenomenon that requires ongoing management? The question seemed to touch on classified information that required careful handling, and Major Thompson paused before providing a response that balanced operational security with the need to brief the site team. Agent Clark, the Phoenix Protocol maintains monitoring stations at 17 locations worldwide. Dimensional instabilities are rare but not unique to Blackwood. Dr. Chen moved to the computer terminal where seismic data was being continuously updated. His attention focused on readings that showed the ongoing escalation of anomalous activity. Major Thompson, the energy levels have increased by 12% since this morning. Is this rate of change consistent with what you've observed at other dimensional instability sites? Major Thompson's expression showed the kind of controlled concern that suggested the rate of change at Blackwood was unusually rapid. Dr. Chin, the escalation rate at Blackwood is approximately 3 times faster than what we observed at previous sites. This suggests that the dimensional barriers here were more compromised than initial assessments indicated. Sarah returned to the table where the Phoenix Protocol documents were spread out, her attention focused on technical specifications that dealt with emergency containment procedures. Major Thompson, are your barrier generators configured for rapid deployment if we experience a cascade failure before your arrival? Major Thompson activated another display that showed the status of her approaching team, their equipment, and estimated arrival times at various checkpoints along the route to Blackwood. Nightingale, we have emergency generators that can be deployed by helicopter if necessary. Captain Torres and Sergeant Morrison may be required to assist with equipment transport. The mention of the helicopter crew drew attention to the fact that their morning transport mission had evolved into something that might require them to participate in operations far beyond their normal duties. Agent Clark made a note to brief the pilots on the potential for additional responsibilities. Dr. Williams updated her seismic monitoring display, showing real-time data that confirmed the continuing escalation of anomalous activity throughout the region. Major Thompson, we're detecting increased activity at all 7 focal points. The formations seem to be resonating with each other, creating a network effect that's amplifying the dimensional instabilities. Major Thompson's expression showed the kind of recognition that suggested network effects were a known complication in dimensional stabilization operations. Dr. Williams, network resonance is one of the factors that makes containment challenging. Our generators are designed to disrupt resonance patterns by creating interference between the focal points. Sarah studied the satellite photographs with renewed attention, looking for patterns that might indicate how the dimensional focal points were connected and how their resonance could be disrupted. Major Thompson, have you encountered network resonance effects at other sites? Are there established procedures for breaking the connections between focal points? Major Thompson nodded, her expression showing the kind of professional confidence that came from experience with complex operations. Nightingale, network disruption is a standard component of our containment procedures. The key is identifying the primary resonance nodes and targeting them with synchronized barrier generation. Dr. Adams checked the facility's power systems, ensuring that Blackwood would be able to support the additional equipment and personnel that would soon arrive. Major Thompson, what are your power requirements for the barrier generators? Do we need to activate auxiliary power systems? Major Thompson consulted her technical specifications. Her attention focused on ensuring that all operational requirements would be met upon arrival. Dr. Adams, the generators include their own power sources, but we'll need access to your facility's computer networks for coordination and monitoring. Agent Clark stood and walked to the communication console, his expression showing the kind of preparation that suggested he was coordinating with other agencies involved in managing the situation. Major Thompson, What's the status of civilian population monitoring in the surrounding region? Are there evacuation contingencies if containment efforts are unsuccessful? Major Thompson's response carried the weight of someone who understood the broader implications of dimensional instability for populated areas. Agent Clark, evacuation protocols are in place for a 50-mile radius around Blackwood. Local authorities have been briefed on emergency procedures without being informed of the specific nature of the threat. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the conference room windows began to take on the golden quality that preceded evening, marking the passage of time as the crisis at Site Blackwood continued to escalate. The team had learned more about their situation in the past hour than they had understood during months of routine operations, but the knowledge had brought with it the weight of responsibility for managing a phenomenon that could affect far more than their isolated research facility. Dr. Chen updated his analysis of the seismic data, his expression showing the kind of concentrated attention that suggested he was beginning to understand patterns that had previously been invisible. The resonance frequencies are shifting toward harmonic convergence. If all 7 focal points achieve synchronized resonance, the energy release could exceed our ability to contain it. Sarah moved to the seismic display, her expression showing the kind of recognition that suggested she understood the implications of harmonic convergence in dimensional systems. Dr. Chen, synchronized resonance would create a feedback loop that could propagate beyond the immediate area. We need to disrupt the network before convergence occurs. Major Thompson's voice from the communication console carried the urgency of someone coordinating a complex operation under increasing time pressure. Nightingale, my team is 30 minutes out from Blackwood. We need to begin preliminary containment procedures immediately to prevent harmonic convergence. Dr. Adams activated the facility's emergency systems, her movements showing the kind of automatic efficiency that came from extensive training in crisis management. Major Thompson, what preliminary procedures can we implement with our current resources? Are there any actions we can take to slow the progression toward harmonic convergence? Major Thompson consulted with her team before responding, her expression showing the kind of careful analysis that suggested she was evaluating multiple tactical options. Dr. Adams, you can begin by isolating the computer systems that monitor the focal points. Electronic interference might be contributing to the resonance network. Agent Clark began implementing the isolation procedures, his movements quick and precise, as he disconnected monitoring systems that might be inadvertently amplifying the dimensional instabilities. Systems isolated, Major Thompson. We're seeing a slight decrease in resonance amplitude. The temporary improvement in conditions provided a brief respite, but the underlying instabilities continued to escalate as the dimensional barriers weakened throughout the region. Outside the conference room windows, the forest surrounding Site Blackwood looked peaceful in the afternoon light, but beneath the surface, forces were at work that would soon require intervention from the most advanced technology that human science could deploy. Sarah gathered the Phoenix Protocol documents and prepared for the arrival of Major Thompson's team, her expression showing the kind of focused determination that suggested she was ready to participate in operations that would test the limits of dimensional stabilization technology. The morning's consultation had evolved into something that would require all of her expertise and experience to manage successfully. The communication console chimed again with an update from Major Thompson's approaching team and the assembled personnel at Site Blackwood, prepared for the next phase of an operation that would determine whether dimensional instabilities could be contained or whether they would transform the region into something that challenged the basic assumptions of reality itself. The distant sound of helicopter rotors announced the arrival of Major Thompson's team, growing louder as multiple aircraft approached Site Blackwood through the mountain passes. Sarah stood at the conference room window watching as 3 military helicopters materialized from the afternoon haze, their dark silhouettes cutting through the sky with the purposeful movement of aircraft on an urgent mission. The lead helicopter bore markings that she recognized from classified operations, while the trailing aircraft carried equipment pods that would soon be deployed in the most complex dimensional stabilization operation ever attempted. Captain Torres received clearance instructions through his radio, coordinating with the incoming aircraft to establish a safe landing pattern that would accommodate the additional helicopters and their specialized cargo. His voice carried the professional calm of a pilot managing complex air traffic, but his expression showed the tension of someone who understood that the routine transport mission had evolved into something far more significant. Major Thompson's helicopter touched down first, its rotors still spinning as personnel began unloading equipment that looked unlike anything in standard military inventories. The barrier generators were sleek cylindrical devices mounted on portable platforms, their surfaces covered with instruments and displays that suggested technology operating according to principles that extended far beyond conventional physics. Teams of specialists moved with practiced efficiency, their coordination demonstrating extensive training in operations that required precise timing and flawless execution. Dr. Adams hurried across the landing pad to greet Major Thompson, who stepped down from her helicopter with the focused intensity of someone preparing to manage a crisis that could have consequences extending far beyond the immediate area. Her uniform bore insignia that indicated specialized training and clearances that weren't available through normal military channels. And her equipment included communication devices that connected directly to the highest levels of government. Major Thompson's first words carried the urgency of someone who had been monitoring the situation during her flight to Blackwood. "Dr. Adams, the resonance frequencies have increased another 8% since we departed Fort Harrison. We need to begin barrier deployment immediately to prevent harmonic convergence." Sarah approached the group, her expression showing the kind of determined focus that suggested she was prepared for the complex operation that lay ahead. "Major Thompson, what's the deployment sequence for the barrier generators? Are we targeting the primary focal points first or attempting simultaneous containment?" Major Thompson activated a handheld device that displayed a tactical map of the area surrounding Site Blackwood, showing the 7 focal points in the optimal positions for barrier generator placement. "Nightingale, we're implementing sequential deployment starting with the strongest focal point and working outward. Simultaneous activation could create interference patterns that might destabilize the entire network." Agent Clark joined the group, his federal credentials giving him authority to coordinate with the specialized team while ensuring that proper protocols were followed for operations involving classified technology. "Major Thompson, what's the estimated time frame for complete deployment? The seismic data suggests we have a narrow window before the next major escalation." Major Thompson consulted her deployment schedule, her attention focused on coordinating multiple teams while maintaining awareness of the rapidly changing conditions throughout the region. "Agent Clark, complete deployment requires approximately 90 minutes, but we should see initial stabilization effects within 30 minutes of beginning the operation." Dr. Chen emerged from the facility carrying printed readouts that showed the most recent seismic data, his expression reflecting the kind of controlled urgency that suggested the situation was approaching critical parameters. "Major Thompson, we're detecting pre-convergence patterns at all 7 focal points. The harmonic frequencies are beginning to synchronize." The implications of harmonic convergence added immediate urgency to the deployment operation, as synchronized resonance between the dimensional focal points could create feedback effects that would overwhelm any containment technology. Major Thompson signaled to her teams, who began moving the barrier generators toward predetermined positions with the swift efficiency of personnel who understood that timing was critical. Sarah walked with Major Thompson toward the first deployment site, her movement showing the kind of automatic situational awareness that suggested extensive experience in operations where small mistakes could have large consequences. "Major Thompson, what are the indicators of successful barrier establishment? How will we know if the generators are effectively strengthening the dimensional boundaries?" Major Thompson pointed to displays on the barrier generator that showed real-time measurements of dimensional stability, energy fluctuations, and resonance patterns. "Nightingale, successful barrier establishment should show immediate reduction in energy bleed-through and disruption of resonance patterns. If the technology is working correctly, we should see stabilization within minutes of activation." The first barrier generator was positioned approximately 50 meters from a formation that appeared to spiral inward toward a central point where the dimensional boundary was weakest. The specialized team worked with practiced precision, calibrating the device according to the specific characteristics of the focal point while monitoring for any changes in the local energy patterns. Dr. Williams accompanied the deployment team, her geological expertise helping to identify the optimal placement for equipment that needed to interact with both surface formations and underground dimensional structures. Major Thompson, the subsurface formations extend deeper than our ground-penetrating radar can detect. Are the barrier generators designed to create containment fields that extend to unknown depths? Major Thompson nodded, her expression showing the kind of professional confidence that came from experience with technology designed to handle variables that couldn't be completely quantified. Dr. Williams, the generators create three-dimensional containment fields that adapt to the specific characteristics of each focal point. The technology can compensate for variations in depth and complexity. The first generator hummed to life with a sound that seemed to resonate at frequencies that were felt rather than heard, creating vibrations that seemed to penetrate the ground and extend into the air around the formation. Immediately, the instruments showed changes in the energy patterns, with readings that suggested the dimensional boundary was beginning to strengthen. Agent Clark monitored the operation from a mobile command post that had been established near the landing pad, coordinating communications between the deployment teams and the various agencies that were tracking the progress of the containment operation. Major Thompson, we're receiving confirmation from satellite monitoring that energy levels are decreasing at the first focal point. The success of the first deployment provided encouragement for the teams working to establish containment at the remaining focal points. But the complex nature of the network meant that disrupting one point could cause unpredictable changes at the others. Dr. Chen continued monitoring the seismic data, watching for any indication that the barrier generator might be causing unintended effects elsewhere in the system. Major Thompson coordinated the movement of the second barrier generator to a focal point located deeper in the forest, where excavation had revealed formations that appeared to be older and more complex than those found at other sites. Team 2, proceed to focal point Beta. Be advised that this location shows the strongest dimensional instability readings. Sarah accompanied the second deployment team, her expertise in dimensional theory helping to guide the calibration of equipment that operated according to principles that challenged conventional understanding of physics. The formations at this site appear to be arranged in patterns that suggest artificial construction. Are we dealing with dimensional instabilities that have been influenced by intelligent design? The question touched on aspects of the Phoenix Protocol that dealt with the possibility that dimensional boundaries might have been deliberately weakened by forces that operated according to motivations that remained unknown. Major Thompson's expression showed the kind of careful consideration that suggested such possibilities were part of the training that Phoenix Protocol personnel received. Major Thompson consulted classified briefing materials that addressed scenarios involving artificial manipulation of dimensional boundaries. Nightingale, artificial manipulation is a possibility that we're prepared to address, but our primary objective is stabilization regardless of the origin of the instabilities. The second barrier generator was positioned with even greater care than the first, as the energy readings at the beta focal point suggested more complex interactions between dimensions. The deployment team worked methodically, ensuring that every calibration was precise and that all safety protocols were followed before activation. Dr. Adams coordinated support operations from the main facility, ensuring that all personnel were accounted for and that emergency procedures were ready if the containment operation encountered unexpected complications. Major Thompson, all non-essential personnel have been moved to safe positions. The facility is ready to implement full evacuation procedures if necessary. The second generator activated with the same resonant hum as the first, but the effects were more dramatic, with visible changes in the air around the focal point that suggested significant alterations in local dimensional stability. The formation that had been spiraling inward began to slow its motion, and the energy readings showed substantial decreases in dimensional bleed-through. Captain Torres remained on standby with his helicopter, ready to provide emergency evacuation or equipment transport if the operation encountered complications that required rapid response. Major Thompson, RAVEN-1 is ready for immediate deployment if you need emergency support at any of the focal points. Major Thompson acknowledged the availability of air support while coordinating the deployment of the third and fourth barrier generators, her attention divided between multiple teams working simultaneously at different locations throughout the valley. Captain Torres, maintain current position. We may need rapid transport if harmonic convergence begins before we can establish complete containment. The third and fourth generators were deployed at focal points that showed less dramatic dimensional instability, but were critical for disrupting the network effects that allowed the sites to amplify each other's energy output. The teams worked with increasing efficiency as they gained experience with the specialized equipment, but the time pressure remained constant as the underlying instabilities continued to escalate. Dr. Chen's monitoring showed that the network effects were beginning to weaken as more focal points came under containment, but the remaining sites were showing increased activity as if compensating for the loss of their connections to the stabilized points. Major Thompson, focal points 5, 6, and 7 are showing energy spikes as the network loses coherence. We may be creating a concentration effect at the remaining sites. The possibility of concentration effects required adjustment of the deployment strategy, as overwhelming the remaining focal points with energy displaced from the contained sites could create instabilities that might be more dangerous than the original network. Major Thompson consulted with her technical specialists to determine the optimal sequence for completing the containment operation. Sarah worked with the deployment teams at the fifth focal point, where the formations showed characteristics that suggested more recent dimensional activity. Major Thompson, this site appears to be the most recently active focal point. The energy patterns are different from the others, more chaotic and less structured. Major Thompson joined Sarah at the fifth site, her expression showing the kind of analytical thinking that suggested she was processing information that might require modification of standard containment procedures. Nightingale, recent activation could mean that this focal point is more responsive to containment technology. We might be able to achieve faster stabilization here. The fifth barrier generator was calibrated according to the specific characteristics of the chaotic energy patterns, with settings that differed from those used at the more structured focal points. The deployment team worked carefully, monitoring for any signs that the unstable dimensional boundary might react unpredictably to the containment field. When the fifth generator activated, the effects were immediate and dramatic, with the chaotic energy patterns quickly stabilizing into more organized forms that suggested successful strengthening of the dimensional boundary. The rapid success at the fifth site provided confidence for the final phase of the operation, but also highlighted the importance of adapting containment procedures to the specific characteristics of each focal point. Agent Clark received updates from monitoring stations throughout the region, confirming that the containment operation was having measurable effects on dimensional stability across a wide area. Major Thompson, regional monitoring shows significant decreases in anomalous activity. The containment fields are working beyond the immediate focal points. The success of the operation began to become apparent as the sixth barrier generator was deployed at a site where excavation had revealed the most complex underground formations. The deployment team worked with extreme care, as the deep structures suggested dimensional boundaries that extended far below the surface and might require specialized containment approaches. Dr. Williams monitored the geological effects of the containment operation, watching for any indication that the barrier generators might be affecting the stability of the rock formations that contain the dimensional focal points. Major Thompson were seeing positive changes in the geological structure. The rock formations are becoming more stable as the dimensional boundaries strengthen. The sixth generator established containment successfully, leaving only the seventh and final focal point requiring stabilization. This site had shown the strongest dimensional instabilities throughout the crisis, and Major Thompson's team approached it with the accumulated experience of the previous deployments, while remaining alert for unexpected complications. Sarah accompanied the final deployment team, her expertise crucial for calibrating the most powerful barrier generator according to the characteristics of the strongest dimensional instability. Major Thompson, this focal point appears to be the primary node in the network. Successful containment here should eliminate the possibility of harmonic convergence. The seventh barrier generator was the largest and most complex device in Major Thompson's inventory, designed specifically for containing the most severe dimensional instabilities. The deployment required careful coordination between multiple specialists, as the power and complexity of the device demanded precise calibration and monitoring. When the final generator activated, the effects resonated throughout the entire valley, with changes that were visible to personnel throughout Site Blackwood. The air seemed to shimmer and settle, as if tensions that had been building for months were finally being released. The seismic monitoring equipment showed dramatic decreases in anomalous activity, and the formations that had been growing and changing began to stabilize. Dr. Chen confirmed the success of the operation through comprehensive analysis of the monitoring data, his expression showing the kind of relief that came from watching a complex crisis resolve through the application of advanced technology and careful planning. Major Thompson, all 7 focal points are showing stable containment. Dimensional boundaries are strengthening throughout the region. Major Thompson coordinated the establishment of monitoring protocols that would ensure continued stability of the containment fields, her teams working to establish permanent communication links and maintenance schedules for the barrier generators. Dr. Adams, the containment operation is complete, but ongoing monitoring will be required to ensure long-term stability. Agent Clark began the process of documenting the operation for the agencies that would need to understand the successful resolution of the dimensional instability crisis. Major Thompson, what are the long-term implications for Site Blackwood? Will the facility be able to resume normal research operations? Major Thompson consulted her operational guidelines for post-containment procedures, her expression showing the kind of professional consideration that suggested long-term planning was already underway. Agent Clark, Site Blackwood will continue operating as a dimensional monitoring facility, but with enhanced capabilities for detecting and responding to future instabilities. Sarah gathered the Phoenix Protocol documents that had been crucial for understanding and resolving the crisis, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone who had successfully applied specialized expertise to a problem that challenged conventional understanding. Dr. Adams, the containment operation has been successful, but dimensional monitoring will need to continue indefinitely to ensure that the barriers remain stable. Dr. Adams walked through the facility that had been her responsibility for 3 years, seeing it with new understanding of its true purpose and the critical role it played in maintaining stability between dimensions. Major Thompson, what training will my team need to understand our ongoing responsibilities for dimensional monitoring? Major Thompson outlined the training programs that would bring the Site Blackwood team up to speed on dimensional monitoring protocols, barrier maintenance procedures, and emergency response plans for future instabilities. The facility would continue operating, but with a fully informed understanding of its mission and the sophisticated technology required to fulfill it. As evening approached, the mountain landscape around Site Blackwood looked peaceful and normal, giving no indication of the complex operation that had just been completed, or the advanced technology that now maintained stability between dimensions. The barrier generators hummed quietly at their positions throughout the valley, their presence almost invisible, but their function critical for preventing future dimensional instabilities. Captain Torres prepared for departure with his helicopter crew, their routine transport mission having evolved into participation in one of the most classified operations in government service. Major Thompson, RAVEN-1 is ready for return to Fort Harrison. Do you need any additional air support for ongoing operations? Major Thompson confirmed that the immediate crisis had been resolved and that normal operations could resume, but with the understanding that Site Blackwood now operated under protocols that connected it to the most advanced and classified programs in government service. Captain Torres, return to Fort Harrison as scheduled. Thank you for your support during this operation. Sarah prepared to depart with Major Thompson's team, her consultation having evolved into direct participation in a successful dimensional stabilization operation. The morning's helicopter ride had brought her to a situation that required all of her expertise and experience, and the successful resolution demonstrated the effectiveness of the Phoenix Protocol in managing threats that operated beyond conventional understanding. Dr. Chen remained at Site Blackwood to continue monitoring the stabilized dimensional boundaries, his scientific career having expanded to include responsibilities that bridged conventional physics and the classified science of dimensional theory. The seismic monitoring equipment would continue operating, but now with full understanding of what it was measuring and why that information was critical for regional and national security. Agent Clark completed his documentation of the operation, ensuring that the agencies responsible for managing classified programs would have complete records of the successful containment of dimensional instabilities at Site Blackwood. The federal oversight responsibilities would continue, but with enhanced understanding of the sophisticated technology and expertise required for dimensional monitoring. The helicopters departed Site Blackwood as the sun set behind the mountain peaks, their rotors cutting through air that had been transformed by the day's operation. The facility below continued its mission with new understanding and enhanced capabilities, ready to detect and respond to future challenges that might emerge from the complex interactions between dimensions. The ankle tattoo that had triggered the morning's dramatic events remained hidden beneath Sarah's jeans, but its significance had been demonstrated through the successful resolution of a crisis that could have had consequences extending far beyond the mountain valley. The Priority Alpha clearance had provided access to expertise and technology that proved capable of managing threats that challenged the basic assumptions of reality. Site Blackwood settled into its evening routine, but with the understanding that routine now included responsibilities for maintaining stability between dimensions and monitoring for signs of future instabilities. The barrier generators continued their quiet operation, creating interference patterns that strengthened the boundaries between realities and prevented the kind of catastrophic cascade failure that could have transformed the region into a permanent dimensional intersection. The successful operation demonstrated that human science and technology could effectively manage dimensional instabilities, but it also highlighted the need for continued vigilance and sophisticated monitoring to detect future threats before they could escalate to crisis levels. The Phoenix Protocol had proven its value, but the challenges of dimensional stability would require ongoing attention from the most qualified personnel and the most advanced technology available. As darkness settled over the mountain valley, the lights of Site Blackwood continued to shine, marking the location of a facility that had successfully defended the stability of reality itself through the application of classified science and the dedication of personnel who understood that some responsibilities extended beyond conventional understanding. The day's crisis had been resolved, but the mission would continue indefinitely, watching and waiting for signs of new challenges that might emerge from the complex relationships between dimensions. 3 months after the containment operation, Sarah Mitchell received a secure communication that would once again change the trajectory of her carefully managed retirement. The message arrived through channels that few people knew existed, encrypted with protocols that required her personal biometric authentication to decode. She read it twice, in the quiet of her Montana cabin, the words carrying implications that extended far beyond the successful stabilization of Site Blackwood. The communication bore the seal of a division within the Department of Defense that officially didn't exist, signed by officials whose names appeared on no public records. The message was brief, precise, and carried the weight of authority that came from the highest levels of classified government operations. Reports of dimensional anomalies were surfacing at locations across 3 continents, each showing characteristics similar to what had occurred at Blackwood, but with variations that suggested a coordinated pattern rather than random occurrences. Sarah packed her worn leather jacket and prepared for another journey into a world where conventional physics gave way to classified science, and routine consultation evolved into operations that challenged basic assumptions about reality. The ankle tattoo that had triggered her involvement in the Blackwood crisis would once again serve as credentials for accessing situations that required expertise in dimensional theory and barrier stabilization technology. Dr. Adams continued her work at Site Blackwood, now fully briefed on the facility's true mission and equipped with monitoring technology that provided real-time data on dimensional stability throughout the region. The barrier generators hummed quietly at their positions in the valley, their operation so seamless that visiting personnel often overlooked their presence entirely. The casual observer would see nothing more than a routine geological research station, but the sophisticated instruments hidden throughout the facility continuously monitored for signs of instability that could require immediate intervention. The Phoenix Protocol had evolved beyond its original scope, transforming from a reactive crisis management program into a proactive global monitoring network that tracked dimensional stability at 17 locations worldwide. Major Thompson had been promoted to colonel and now coordinated international cooperation between agencies that most governments didn't acknowledge existed. The success at Blackwood had demonstrated the effectiveness of barrier stabilization technology, but it had also revealed the need for enhanced surveillance and rapid response capabilities. Agent Clark found himself assigned to a new position within the federal oversight structure, his experience with dimensional instabilities making him valuable for coordinating between civilian agencies and the classified programs that managed threats operating beyond conventional understanding. His reports would never appear in public documents, but they provided crucial intelligence for policymakers who needed to understand challenges that couldn't be addressed through traditional diplomatic or military channels. Captain Torres and Sergeant Morrison returned to their duties at Fort Harrison, but with security clearances that gave them access to information about operations that extended far beyond routine military transport missions. Their helicopter now carried specialized communication equipment that could connect directly to Phoenix Protocol command centers, and their training included protocols for supporting dimensional monitoring operations that might require immediate aviation support. Dr. Chen published research papers that carefully avoided mentioning the classified aspects of his work while contributing to the scientific understanding of seismic phenomena and geological instabilities. His public work provided cover for continued research into dimensional theory, and his laboratory at Site Blackwood became a center for developing new monitoring technologies that could detect instabilities before they reached crisis levels. The network of monitoring stations established under the Phoenix Protocol began detecting patterns in dimensional stability that suggested the Blackwood incident was part of a larger phenomenon affecting multiple locations across the globe. Stations in remote areas of Siberia, the Australian outback, and the Sahara Desert all reported increases in anomalous activity that followed similar progressions to what had occurred in the Montana mountains. Sarah found herself traveling between these locations, her expertise in dimensional theory making her an essential consultant for operations that required understanding of forces that operated according to principles extending beyond conventional physics. Each assignment revealed new aspects of dimensional instability, from underground formations that appeared to be artificially constructed to energy patterns that suggested intelligence behind their creation. The success of the barrier stabilization technology at Blackwood led to requests for similar operations at other locations, but each site presented unique challenges that required adaptation of containment procedures to local conditions. The generators that had worked effectively in Montana needed modification for deployment in desert environments, Arctic conditions, and underground installations that existed in locations that appeared on no official maps. Colonel Thompson's expanded responsibilities included coordination with international partners who operated their own dimensional monitoring programs, some of which had been tracking anomalies for decades without understanding their true nature. The sharing of Phoenix Protocol technology and expertise led to joint operations that involved personnel from multiple countries working together to address threats that transcended national boundaries. The financial resources required for global dimensional monitoring came from budgets that existed in the classified sections of government spending, funded through programs that combined legitimate research with the specialized requirements of dimensional stability operations. The technology development alone required investment levels that rivaled major defense programs, but the potential consequences of dimensional cascade failures justified expenditures that remained hidden from public oversight. Sarah's cabin in Montana became an unofficial coordination center for Phoenix Protocol operations, equipped with communication systems that connected directly to monitoring stations worldwide. Her expertise was consulted for situations ranging from routine anomaly detection to crisis-level instabilities that required immediate intervention. The quiet retirement she had planned evolved into global responsibility for managing threats that most people couldn't imagine. The barrier generators deployed at Blackwood underwent continuous monitoring and periodic maintenance, their operation requiring specialized personnel who understood both the technology and the theoretical principles that made dimensional stabilization possible. The maintenance schedules were coordinated with monitoring data that predicted when generator efficiency might decline and containment fields might weaken. Dr. Williams expanded her geological research to include analysis of formations found at multiple dimensional instability sites, her work revealing patterns that suggested connections between locations separated by thousands of miles. The underground structures that appeared at various sites showed design characteristics that indicated common origins, but dating techniques suggested they had been created across spans of time that challenged conventional understanding of human history. The classified nature of dimensional monitoring operations required careful management of personnel who became aware of the true scope of the Phoenix Protocol, their security clearances and psychological evaluations ensuring that information about dimensional instabilities remained within authorized channels. The selection criteria for personnel involved in these operations included not only technical expertise but also the psychological stability required for working with concepts that challenged basic assumptions about reality. Public cover stories for Phoenix Protocol activities continued to describe routine scientific research, geological surveys, and environmental monitoring programs that provided plausible explanations for the sophisticated equipment and specialized personnel involved in dimensional stability operations. The success of these cover stories depended on careful coordination between multiple agencies and the cooperation of personnel who understood the importance of maintaining operational security. Sarah's most challenging assignment came 18 months after Blackwood, when dimensional anomalies began appearing in populated areas where concealment would be impossible and evacuation would affect millions of people. The Phoenix Protocol faced its greatest test in managing instabilities that couldn't be hidden from public attention while maintaining the secrecy required for continued operations. The solution required development of new technologies that could provide dimensional stabilization without visible infrastructure, using barrier generators that operated at frequencies invisible to casual observation and monitoring systems that appeared to be routine urban infrastructure. The success of these urban operations demonstrated the adaptability of Phoenix Protocol technology, but also highlighted the growing scope of dimensional instability as a global phenomenon. International cooperation expanded to include sharing of monitoring data, joint development of stabilization technology, and coordinated response protocols for multinational incidents that required resources beyond what any single country could provide. The Phoenix Protocol evolved into a truly global program with participants from dozens of countries, all united by the understanding that dimensional instability represented a threat that transcended political boundaries. The scientific understanding of dimensional theory advanced through practical experience with barrier stabilization operations, leading to development of more efficient generators, more sensitive monitoring equipment, and more accurate prediction models for identifying locations where instabilities might develop. The combination of theoretical research and operational experience created a feedback loop that accelerated technological development. Sarah's role evolved from consultant to director of a global network of specialists who understood dimensional theory and barrier stabilization technology, her expertise making her the final authority for operations that required decisions about risks and benefits that couldn't be quantified through conventional analysis. Her recommendations influenced policy decisions that affected resource allocation for programs worth billions of dollars and operations that protected millions of people from threats they would never understand. The Phoenix Protocol established training programs for personnel who would inherit responsibility for dimensional monitoring as the original specialists aged out of active service, ensuring continuity of expertise that would be required for decades or centuries of ongoing operations. The training combined theoretical education with practical experience at operational sites, creating a new generation of specialists who understood both the science and the operational requirements of dimensional stability. Site Blackwood became a training center for Phoenix Protocol personnel, its successful containment operation providing a case study for understanding how dimensional instabilities developed and how barrier stabilization technology could be effectively deployed. The facility expanded to include classrooms, simulation equipment, and practical training areas where new personnel could gain experience with barrier generators under controlled conditions. The monitoring data collected from global Phoenix Protocol operations revealed patterns in dimensional stability that suggested predictable cycles of activity, leading to development of forecasting models that could predict when and where instabilities might develop months or years in advance. These predictions enabled proactive deployment of monitoring equipment and preparation of response teams before crisis conditions developed. Sarah's final official report to the Phoenix Protocol leadership outlined recommendations for the future of dimensional monitoring, including expansion of the global network, development of more advanced stabilization technology, and establishment of permanent research facilities dedicated to understanding the fundamental nature of dimensional boundaries. Her recommendations influenced strategic planning that would guide Phoenix Protocol operations for the next generation of specialists. The success of dimensional stabilization operations created confidence that human technology could effectively manage instabilities, but also highlighted the ongoing nature of the challenge and the need for permanent vigilance against threats that operated according to principles that extended beyond conventional understanding. The Phoenix Protocol had proven its value, but its mission would continue indefinitely as humanity learned to coexist with the complex realities of dimensional interaction. As Sarah prepared for true retirement, she reflected on the journey that had begun with a priority alpha clearance scan at a helicopter landing pad and evolved into leadership of a global program that protected reality itself from forces that most people would never comprehend. The ankle tattoo that had triggered her involvement remained hidden beneath casual clothing, but its significance had been demonstrated through operations that safeguarded the stability of dimensions across multiple continents. The Phoenix Protocol continued its mission with new leadership and expanded capabilities, its success measured not by public recognition, but by the absence of dimensional cascade failures that could have transformed populated regions into permanent intersections between realities. The barrier generators hummed quietly at their positions around the world, their operation maintaining the boundaries that separated parallel dimensions and preserved the stability that made normal life possible. The monitoring stations reported routine dimensional stability, their sensors detecting no anomalies that required immediate intervention, but their vigilance would continue indefinitely as humanity maintained its watch over forces that operated beyond the boundaries of conventional physics. The success of the Phoenix Protocol had demonstrated that dimensional instabilities could be managed, but the responsibility for that management would pass to future generations who would inherit both the technology and the understanding required for protecting reality itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.